Hey everybody, welcome back to Eternal Basics. My name is Pojo, and today we're going to be talking about advantage. Now, there are a lot of different types of what we consider advantage in Eternal, and if I were to define advantage, I would say you look at advantage to determine who is ahead in the game and for what reasons. So, for example, if you want to see who's winning a game of Eternal, you might look at their board and see exactly how many units of what types are on their board and see whether or not they have a board advantage. For the deck that we previously covered, Firestarter, we focused on health advantage, which is to say the only thing that really mattered for us was who had the most health and whether or not our opponent's health was close to zero, because when we got our opponent's health close to zero, we were at a significant advantage due to the fact that any of our cards that we pulled, like Flash Fire or Torch, could kill our opponent very, very quickly. This time around, what we're going to be doing is focusing on board advantage. We're going to be trying to build a board that is advantageous to our position so that we can attack in for lethal using just the cards that we have played out. And we are going to try and leverage that advantage to win the game and to help ourselves into a better position. So we're going to be looking at the Hand of Justice deck. This is a deck that you get when you beat Roland's campaign, I believe, or it might just come free. Either way, you should be able to get this very, very early just by completing the tutorials and being all through the deck. We're going to be upgrading this with commons and uncommons. That is the rule for our Eternal Basics series, and we're going to be trying to make this deck better by getting rid of the bad cards, getting into some better cards, and focusing again on a particular strategy. This deck has a couple of different strategies, but the one that we're going to use is the weapons focused strategy. We're going to build a bunch of decent units, we're going to equip them with weapons, and then we're going to push through to win the game. To that extent, let's look at our cards and let's see what needs to get cut and what needs to not. So first off, we have Steadfast Deputy. This card, as far as things go, I love the Aegis effect. That protection from one spell or effect is really, really beneficial, but overall, it's just not doing enough on stats to give us the board advantage that we need. So this is going to be one of the first cuts out of the deck, and we're going to add in a new card, Steady Marshal, which gives us a little bit more in terms of stats. And if we have a Gunslinger ally, which is to say if we play another Gunslinger alongside Steady Marshal, we will get a +1/+1 weapon on it, making it a 2/3 for 1. That's really, really good stats for us, and that'll give us the kind of advantage that we need early in the game, both defensively and offensively. We really like this card, so we're going to throw in 4 copies of it and make sure that we're all set up. Now we also have a card called Roland's Favor, which we are using to get ourselves to a significant amount of extra power. But Roland's Favor doesn't really work for us in terms of building on the board. All it does is give us armor, which we use primarily to play relic weapons. And since we don't have that many relic weapons, and indeed we're planning on getting rid of the one that we do have, we're going to instead cut away Roland's Favor, and I'm going to throw in a card called Copperhall Porter, which can still fix for our power, but mostly functions to give us more things to play on board early on to help us out in trading later in the game. This card's really quite tops for making sure that your power is fixed in certain situations. A lot of times people don't even want to block it because they don't want you to draw the Justice Sigil from your deck when you entomb it. So yeah, that card can be really, really effective. Some other cards that really need to go away. We have Marshal, or sorry, whoops, we have Treasury Guard is the next one. All right, I'm looking at my list. So Treasury Guard is a 2/3 endurance. Overall, the stats on this are pretty good. It equips well with weapons. There's some things to like about it, but I have generally found in practice this card is just not strong enough for a 3 cost. So we're going to go ahead and ditch this card completely. We're also going to cut 2 other vanilla cards that really don't do enough for us. Copperhall Recruit, which is a this is a 4-cost 2/5 that, while really good on defense, is not the kind of benefit that we're really looking for. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that card. And we're also going to get rid of a card called Huru Fledgling, which, while a flyer, which is really nice if you're trying to be evasive, doesn't really do enough in terms of what it's doing with stats or what it's doing for our game plan. So we're going to cut that card out as well. In its place, we're going to add some really, really good 2-drops and 3-drops that fit our weapon-focused plan. Namely, we're going to roll with the Crownwatch Paladin, which is another one of the extremely solid uncommon 2-drops. This is another card that belongs in a lot of Justice decks and is just very, very very good. Paladin and Outlaw are two of the stronger 2-drops in the game, and I highly recommend this one for a lot of different Justice decks. We're also going to run a card called Silverwing Familiar, which is a 1/1 with Flying, Aegis, and Lifesteal. This card doesn't look like much, but the way it carries weapons and the lifesteal advantage that it gives you is really, really good. This card can really save you in situations where you're up against more aggressive decks by flying over their heads, getting a bunch of damage with weapons, and then stealing life back to make sure that you never get run over by aggressive strategies. It's also fairly hard to kill, which is a thing that we really want on our weapons. We're going to be focusing a little bit on these Aegis units. These two are going to be the primary things that we want to put weapons on, because when a unit has an Aegis, it takes more than one spell to kill the unit. That means that our opponents have to spend multiple effects to get rid of our cards. And that can be really good for us because we're already playing multiple cards onto these cards to make sure that we can get them across for the amount of damage that we want. So we want our opponent to trade evenly with these cards 2 for 2, or maybe even have difficulty getting rid of these cards since we're investing so much in them by playing weapons on them. The primary weapon we're going to be running with is Mantle of Justice, a +1/+1 for each of your green influence weapon for 4 that's going to be really, really solid after we have built ourselves a good strong board. We're also going to be keeping the Crownwatch Longsword and the Valkyrie Wings, which give Aegis to whatever unit we play them on. So that'll give us a really decent amount of small things that we can use to make our units into bigger threats after we have established a good board position. We'll be pretty happy to have that. Alright, so some other things that we want to move around. Rebuke, silence and stun a unit. So this is a really good example of board advantage versus aggression. Rebuke allows us to get past blockers and also disable certain types of blockers, but the problem that we have with this card is that it leaves the enemy unit behind, which means that unless we are playing really, really aggressive, whatever it is that we spend a card on is going to stick around and be a threat to us in 2 or 3 turns, because after it is stunned, it'll eventually get readied again and potentially be kind of a problem for us. So this is a card that we actually don't want, and we're going to cut that card out and increase the number of vanquishes, which absolutely kill any big threats that are actually causing us problems on the board. So we're going to go up to 4 on that one. Beyond that, we also have Finest Hour, a card that we love. We're going to increase that by 2. And we're going to do a little bit of curve topping and make sure that we're able to play all of this stuff very early on without having any issues with power. So we're going to cut some 5s and 6s, specifically Mithril Mace, which is okay, and Fourth Tree Elder, which is very strong in most early decks, but really doesn't want to be where we're at. Like, we're more interested in building early units and then giving them weapons as opposed to getting the big units out and then giving those weapons. So we're going to cut all of those, get ourselves into a better position. As we can see, we have 28 Justice Sigils. We can handle 25 if we get rid of some of these 6-dropses, so we'll go ahead and cut 3 of those, and just for kicks we can also add in the Waystones. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it does help just a little bit, so the Emerald Waystones will get thrown in. That'll just give us a little bit better bump on our power setup. We'll keep Roland and Roland's Honor Guard because they're both very solid units, and bomb rares, fun things to play once you get into the late game, so we're going to be pretty satisfied with that result. So that should be very, very good for us. Alright, beyond that, we have a reasonable amount of other options that we can play around with. One of the things that we're going to want to throw in is we need some gunslingers to benefit Steady Marshal, since Steady Marshal cares about gunslinger allies. So we're going to cut out the Minotaur Grunts here, and we're going to add in a couple of gunslingers in green. There are actually 2 that we're looking for, and just took myself a screenshot there, but I think we're all good. The 2 we're looking for are Crackshot Fugitive, which gets +1/+1 for each of your units that's wielding a weapon. That's very, very powerful for us. And we also have Copperhall Marshal, which whenever you play a weapon on Copperhall Marshal, stuns an enemy unit and gets us a little bit of basically ways to get across for the damage that we need. We put all of those in, we feel pretty happy about that result, And yeah, overall, I think it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and cut one card from here. That's the Loyal Watchwing. This guy doesn't really belong in the deck. It's a little bit too weak in the air. But beyond that, that'll get us to the deck that we want to run, which is a 35-unit list with a ton of attachments and a decent amount of spells. We get to keep our Order of the Spire and a couple of other cool, neat cards that we can play around with and have a lot of fun with. And yeah, overall, this deck should have just a really reasonable curve of 2-drops that's going to allow us to reliably play out onto the board and get the kind of advantage we're looking for. So let's go into a couple of games, shall we? All right, here we are up against Buster status, and opener looks pretty okay. We have a 2-drop and a 3-drop, and Mantle of Justice at 4 is a really, really good card to be putting on this Copperhall Marshal to both buff the Crackshot Fugitive and stun enemy units with the Marshal. So that seems like a really cool deal. I think this is definitely the kind of game plan that we're looking for, and we're just going to go ahead and play a Justice Sigil and start working on our tempo. Now this deck is somewhat tempo. The idea behind a tempo deck is that you're trying to efficiently spend your power on the board every turn. So you just always want to be playing something on 2, you always want to be playing something on 3, and just sort of using your power as efficiently as possible, making sure that there isn't any wasted so that you have the maximum amount of stats on board and you build your board faster than anybody else. That's sort of how tempo decks work. Alright, this is interesting. The 2/2 trades with the 1/1s, and that allows me to get more attacks in more frequently, which can be very good. I'd actually say that that seems reasonable here, seeing as we have the possibility of having a trick or something along those lines. My opponent's not likely to block, so as a result I can play Bright Mace Paladin or Mantle of Justice or any number of other things. I think what we want to do here is play Copperhall Marshal, because the Gunslinger is going to be pretty useful here. Now my opponent's in red and blue Skycrag, so playing Mantle of Justice on a Bright Mace Paladin might actually end up being the better play. We're going to find out in just a little bit here. Alright, so the 2/2 is pretty scary. I think what I want to do here is I'm just going to play the Mantle of Justice on this 3/3. I'm going to stun the Rakano Outlaw, and I'm going to attack for a full 10 damage. Now, in this way, I'm getting rid of something on board for the moment. I'm clearing out blockers because he can't really afford to take that much damage, and I'm also developing some extra stats in terms of the Crackshot Fugitives +1/+1 bonus on attack. So we're getting very, very efficient stats, and every Justice that we play is going to make this 7/7 that much better. Vadius Clanfather is a good build on board to be sure, but he doesn't stop an 8/8, and the 2/2 is still good for attacking, so we're going to go ahead and attack with both of these guys. Now, as usual, we want to play our units after attacks, because this allows us to play tricks, and it also means that if my opponent has some sort of torch or something that he wants to use on the Bright Mace Paladin, then he might use it on the Crackshot Fugitive instead, and that could benefit us. So Bright Mace Paladin and Crownwatch Paladin make the grade, and now we have quite a few units on board. My opponent is an aggro deck, but he's going to have a hard time actually being aggressive with me when he has an 8/8 to deal with on the attack, plus a bunch of other stats that put him on a much faster clock. So with all of the advantage that we've built in this early game, like, we're looking very, very strong here. Alright, these two guys both attack in, and I think that my key thing here is I don't really want to block them at all. My Bright Mace Paladin is perfectly valuable, and I could lose it to some sort of trick, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to take that damage. Meanwhile, the Crownwatch Paladin can be used to chump block later. It's somewhat like proof against any sort of Aegises or any sort of trick spells, so it's a fairly solid card to be running. We attack here for 3, 8, and 3. The 8 obviously gets blocked. 6 gets through. And we're going to play Argenport Soldier here. Now, my opponent is the aggressive deck, so we're okay with taking some bad trades. Like, we can block the 2/1 with a 2/1 of our own. We can generally make sure that stuff doesn't kill us if at all possible. One thing that I can do here is, if I want to, And actually, I should here. You can see that the Rakano Outlaw has Quick Draw, and it's easy to get kind of confused with Quick Draw, but the way that Quick Draw works is that it only gives you the extra damage back if you kill the blocking unit. So if we actually block Rakano Outlaw with the 2-3 and the 2-1, then the Rakano Outlaw can only kill one of these, which means the other one's going to deal 2 damage back and kill the Rakano Outlaw. So we go ahead and block here. My Aegis unit gets knocked out, not a huge surprise there. And now we're working on an Emerald Waystone, which helps us out with Roland's Honor Guard. I'm very happy to see that. I need to push damage here because this Pyro Knight's going to get pretty big over time, and my opponent's going to pull into tricks like Permafrost and other things. So I would like to try and win the game as early as humanly possible here. So we're going to push for a full 6+9, and we're going to try and force the Pyro Knight to actually get into a trade. And that's great for us. Now that the Pyro Knight has traded, it can no longer turn into a 6-5 if he draws a power, which would have dealt a lot of damage to our face and also been a very good blocker. We have a 3-3 still, we have our 9-9 still, we're still better off on board, so we're in a better position. And not only that, we also have a health lead from our Emerald Waystones and from all of the blockers that we've had. So we're in very good shape here, like the board is definitely in our favor, and this Roland's Honor Guard will seal things up because it both has lifesteal, which is very important, and is pretty capable as just a unit on its own. Now, as you can see, my opponent can't actually do an attack here because he has to block with Vadius to stay alive. So attacking for 10 here gets the trade with Vadius. This is the thing about having low health. It actually makes it so that your opponent is forced to take worse trades. And being ahead on board also leads to better trades for you, so it's usually very good to build out the board as much as possible. Roland's Honor Guard can seal up against any sort of aggressive deck. We're in very good shape here, and that will be the game. Here we are up against Choco. I've got Emerald Waystone, and beyond that, I don't know. Looks like this hand probably isn't really playable. We're going to go ahead and redraw and see if we can pick anything up that's going to help us out. Alright, well there's a nice opener. Crownwatch Paladin into Mantle of Justice can create a very, very big unit very early on. We want to find some other stuff to fill out this curve since we are a tempo deck. We want to be playing power efficiently every turn, and we want to sort of be basically using our power whenever possible to put the maximum value of stats out onto the board so that we have the board advantage. So basically what we're going to be looking for here is we're going to be throwing Paladin first. We're going to hope for a 3-drop or more 2-drops or even a 1-drop in this first draw. And if we can do some like 1, 2, 3, 4 work, then Crownwatch Paladin with a Mantle of Justice should really help take over the game. My opponent plays Crest of Impulse. This is Praxis stuff. Praxis has 2 formats currently on the map that may change with the release of Fall of Argenport. There is a token stack that tries to play very, very wide, in which it basically, when you go wide, you're looking to put a lot of different units on the board so that you can constantly get around your opponent, and so you can also buff those things with large relics or big spells. And you can also, in Praxis, go tall, which is to say you can play really, really large units like Sentinels, and you can use those units to just overwhelm your opponent with raw stat values. With blue here, he actually could be even unitless. It's hard to say exactly what he's going to be doing here. Temporal Distortion decks are red, yellow, and blue, so that might be what we're looking at. And those don't typically build any sort of board at all, but they also don't really do that well against good tempo with Aegises. So I think we're in pretty good shape here, and if we can actually get some stuff going, we should have a pretty good time. Alright. There's a couple of things that we can do here. I'd say Vanquish is probably the best one. I also like Mantle of Justice to push more damage, but this seems like the safest route that's also going to get me a pretty guaranteed amount of damage. So we go ahead and do that, and then we can lay the Mantle of Justice down next turn. Crest of Wisdom is getting a little bit more going on. So what this deck probably is in red, yellow, and blue is a Sentinel-based deck. And the idea behind this type of deck is that you are playing Sentinels with Explorers, and you're using a card called Stirring Sand to get them back from your Void. In that case, it usually helps to have Sentinels in your Void, so he might be willing to take some trades here or do some interesting shenanigans. We're certainly going to just try and force as much damage as possible, because one of the things about Sentinel decks is that while they tend to run a lot of large units that are very, very scary on their own, it also doesn't run a lot of hard removal. So cards like Torch do occur, and cards like Equivocate are a little bit more likely. Ah, we found a Grim Stranger, lovely. Alright, Grim Stranger deals a little bit of damage, so I'm pretty down with that. I think what we're going to do here is we're going to play Bright Mace Paladin. We're going to play Crackshot Fugitive. We're going to play this Emerald Waystone as well. And I'm going to just stay put. If the Sandstorm Titan attacks me, so be it. We are perfectly happy with that block. In fact, one of the nice things about having a wide board with decent stat lines is that we can do really beneficial blocks. Having the advantage gives you a defensive edge, because when my opponent attacks with this Titan, then I get to block with both of these 4/4s, in which case he can only kill one 4/4, so we trade evenly. That gives me basically the advantage, because while cards like Heart of the Vault are very scary, like I get to trade a 3-cost unit with a 4-cost unit and basically just get out a little bit ahead. Alright, so Heart of the Vault kills my dude, which is a bit of a bummer, but not the end of the world. Now, I've got a cool trick here. Steady Marshal has an ally with this Gunslinger, which gives him a +1/+1 sidearm. And that's important because the weapon on this card is going to count towards Crackshot Fugitive's ability that gives it +1/+1 for each unit wielding a weapon. Now when I put a Mantle of Justice on Bright Mace Paladin, I have an 11/11, and I also have a 6/6 on attack. So my opponent can double block here, but he's still going to take 6 from the Crackshot Fugitive. So we see this double block here. That's interesting. I'm a little curious as to why he did it that way. He's still going to take 11 here. And he doesn't have lifesteal, so while I'm guessing he has some way to defend against the Bright Mace Paladin overall, it's probably great here to play Grim Stranger, because Grim Stranger deals 1 damage on attack due to me having a single Stranger. So regardless of what kind of board position he builds, I can now cheat out the rest in just the tiny amount of reach that this random unit gave me. So that's really good for me. Alright, so we're going to see if Chaco can find an answer. My guess is that he's dead, but he's looking over his options. There's going to be a little bit of a check here as he tries to find the right cards for the job. Wisdom of the Elders is a pretty good one. If he can torch the 2/2 and also figure out a blocker, then he can live for another turn. Trailblaze, that's going to get him a little bit more of a draw, but it's probably not going to get him what he wants, so that'll be the end of the game. And that was a pretty good one, I would say. So the key thing about having advantage on board is that it makes every decision that your opponent makes that much worse, and every decision that you make that much better. For example, if I have 2 2/2 units down on the board and my opponent has a 3/3 of some kind and they want to attack in, then I can choose to block with both of those 2/2 units, and the trade will be he'll deal 3 damage, which means that he gets to kill one of my 2/2s, and my 2/2s will kill his 3/3. So I'll get a trade that is better for me because I have the board position and the necessary stats to make that kind of block. If a unit has lifesteal or some other ability that benefits from the block as well, then so much the better. There's a lot of ways that basically just having a board position leads to better and better board positions, and slowly the game spirals out of control into your favor and out of your opponent's. That's the kind of thing that you're really looking for. The Crownwatch Paladin is just your standard sort of advantage engine. Not only is it just constantly being on board and being hard for your opponent to remove so that you actually get to keep a board, but it also gets you continuously larger units the more that it attacks, which means that you get to get stuff that your opponent wouldn't necessarily have access to, and you can play those down and have even better effects. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for building out a board and making sure that your board is better than your opponent's. And if you can do that kind of thing, that's usually a really good way to win rounds of Eternal. So keep an eye on what's going on the board, try and build out your board advantage, and keep an eye on other types of advantage as well. Do you have more cards than your opponent? Do you have more options? We're going to talk more about these types of advantage and ways that we can build in later videos, but basically keep an eye on what it is that makes your deck win, and try to do as much of that as possible. Try to make it so that the deck follows a plan that really behaves well with whatever it is that you're doing. So make a plan, stick to it, and get some cool things out of the bargain, I'd say, is probably the lesson to be learned here. That's it for today's Eternal Basics. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys with another one very soon. We're going to be talking about time cards and value. See you in a bit.